So I want to bring in Elizabeth McCormick, a former Black Hawk helicopter pilot, and Cedric Layton, CNN military analyst and retired Air Force colonel. Elizabeth, let me start with you. An Army pilot who has flown Black Hawk helicopters like you in this area around Reagan National Airport told CNN's reporter Haley Pritzky that the Army's flights are routinely planned down to the tiniest detail. This pilot said that based on the risk, the briefer will approve or disapprove parts of the flight plan. That assessment is then run by the unit's commander, then submitted to the FAA. So if it went through all of those levels, the question, of course, is just how could this have happened?
Well, I believe there's three things that happened. If it had just been one, it wouldn't have been an issue. But three different things happened. First of all, they only had a crew of 3. And if you're flying a visual flight plan in a crowded airspace like this, they really should have had 2 crew chiefs in the back of the helicopter to clear each side, as the pilots only have visibility from straight ahead 12 to 3 o'clock, or 12 from 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock. So you only have visibility of the front 180 degrees. Your crew chiefs clear the back. If you only have 1 crew chief, how much can you clear? So I think that was a major issue.
So
as
that's
well
interesting.
As the altitude. Yeah. Go ahead.
Keep going. Well, so are you saying instead of a crew of 3, it should have been a crew of 4? How many people should have been on the helicopter? And then please continue with your other 2 points.
Yes, so 3 is a minimum crew for a Black Hawk helicopter. In my opinion, when you're going into visual flight mode in a crowded airspace like this, it should be a minimum of 4. So you have a pilot on each side for visibility. That's the first one. The second one is, it is, whether they were on night vision goggles at that time or not, it is a very cluttered airspace with a lot of lighting and the lights reflecting on the river. And so with that, it's easy to kind of get a little disoriented as far as the height. They were supposed to be at 200 feet, which is the helicopter routing in that area, and it wouldn't have been a conflict, but they were not at 200 feet. Obviously, reportedly, the incident happened at around 350 to 400 feet as the airliner was descending. So that they were at the wrong height. So that's a pilot error. The first would be a policy error or choice. And then the third is air traffic control said, do you have the CRJ in sight? Well, there were two aircraft in their field of view, and actually only one was really obvious to them. And that was if you watch the video, the aircraft taking off in the foreground is probably the one they were facing, the pilots were facing, and said, yeah, I got it. The air traffic control should have said, do you have the aircraft at 5 o'clock? So they were looking at the rear. If they had done that, the Black Hawk is maneuverable. The Black Hawk could have moved out of the way quickly. They can move on a dime and make that happen. And it wouldn't have happened.
Cedric, that's one of the most informed explanations I've heard of what possibly went wrong that I've yet. Thank you so much for that. Do you agree with what you had to say?
Yeah, basically I do, Jake. Elizabeth has obviously a wealth of experience with this, and when you look at the way in which the crews are set up for Black Hawk helicopters, that's a critical thing. You know, you've got the mission planning piece that you mentioned, and as Elizabeth was explaining, there are also so many concerns that they have to really look at, including not only the weather and not only air traffic considerations, but also what kind of things they can expect in terms of topographical features and things like that. And that should be a given. But there are things that change sometimes. Sometimes there's new construction and things like that. And so they have to have as much meticulous planning as possible. And if that planning isn't taken into consideration and isn't done in the right way, then of course there could be significant consequences. Not saying that that happened here, of course.
Right. We don't know. We're just trying to make informed observations about what possibly happened. Obviously, Elizabeth says that the Black Hawk was supposed to be at 200 feet, and it was actually at 350. Right. Is that easy? Is that a mistake that's easy to make to be at 350 when you think you're at 200 feet?
Not normally, because the altimeter, which measures your altitude, is supposed to be calibrated to be exact, and you should never fly an aircraft that doesn't have that kind of an instrument calibrated properly. So that should not happen. If they, for some reason flew at 300 instead of 200, that could be a significant issue, and that could explain why they were flying, where they were flying, and at what altitude they were flying. So it is a significant thing that the NTSB is definitely going to have to look at.
All right, fascinating stuff. Cedric Layton here and Elizabeth McCormick, thanks to both of you.
For more on this, I want to bring in CNN's Danny Freeman, who is here with me at Reagan National Airport. And Danny, obviously, anyone who lives in this area has flown inside this airport a million times and understands how busy these runways are. This was actually a huge fight in Congress last year because lawmakers want to always add a direct flight so they can get back home easily on the weekends when they're out of session. But lawmakers from Virginia and from Maryland were expressing a lot of concern about adding more flights to put in this airspace, given how congested it already was.
Yeah, you heard Senator Tim Kaine speak about that a lot, both last night and, of course, today as well, that this has been a concern that he's been talking about for quite some time. And I think you can expect to hear more about that, not only because of the tragedy that happened yesterday, but also because part of our CNN Investigates team, they've been unveiling, or I should say reporting on, near misses, specifically here at Reagan National Airport in the past, that have also specifically happened when it comes to landing around helicopters. According to, again, some of our CNN Investigates teammates, in the past 3 years, at least 2 other pilots have reported near misses, specifically where they had to make evasive maneuvers with passenger planes to avoid hitting helicopters as they were coming in for a landing. So you can expect that piece of information to definitely get more scrutiny and perhaps fuel more fire to this conversation about if there perhaps is too much traffic in general, but also when it comes to these helicopters flying sometimes routine missions around this area.
Yeah, and that was something that stood out to me today from that briefing that we had at the White House, where the new Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, was there, and he was essentially saying that he said the pilots on the helicopter were fairly experienced. We know it was 3 members. That's pretty standard for a lot of these training flights, which we thought it was a training flight because it happened at night. He said that this one was a continuity of government flight. We know that we had heard that sometimes they do these where essentially if there was something that had to happen and they had to whisk someone, a senior congressional leader, for example, out of wherever they were in Washington, it would be a flight like this where it would happen. So that's why these helicopters were flying so close to the airspace.
Well, and Caitlin, I mean, we heard from Natasha Bertrand today, also from the Pentagon, saying that these pilots aboard that Black Hawk helicopter had as much as 1,500 hours of experience. So again, to your point, these were not inexperienced people who are behind the controls here, but we're still waiting to see just what went so wrong last night.
Danny Freeman, thank you for that. And also tonight, an Army pilot who has flown a Black Hawk helicopter near the airport describes what that is like. Retired Marine Colonel William Bernard Dunn, a former attack helicopter pilot, is here with me now. And Colonel, thank you for being here. Can you just, as someone who has done this, can you tell us, one, what it's like and how challenging it is to fly over in this airspace?
Thank you. It is very challenging. I've flown Marine Cobras right there on the low-level route around Reagan National Airport, several decades ago. It's very difficult. You're working with air traffic control nonstop, and you're focused completely on ensuring that in my time, you couldn't go above 100 feet above the ground level. And so it's very challenging, but it's very doable.
And so what was the first thought that went through your head when you heard this? Because, we heard a small plane had crashed in the Potomac. That was the initial report. And obviously we got a lot more information. But the minute I heard Black Hawk helicopter, I mean, it was just stunning to hear that it had collided with a passenger plane.
Well, the first thing when I heard the news is I was very confident that we're not going to be any survivors. We've had several mishaps over our years in the military that I've been in, and almost always a midair results in complete fatalities. Sometimes people are able to survive, but rarely. So I was very upset, and I felt for the families of the soldiers as well as all the civilians on the airplane.
Yeah, and as did we, of course, those 3 soldiers who were serving and were on that Black Hawk helicopter. Colonel, thank you for coming on and sharing your expertise with me tonight.